As the sun was about to set, Naoe made it up to the top of the Nijo Castle. From there, the city was a tapestry of the hustling and bustling markets, the tranquil temple grounds, and the natural beauty of the mountains, the gardens, and the Kamo River. The people below had already lightened up their lanterns and hearths, while the last rays of the sun reflected on the golden walls of the Kinkaku-ji to the north. In the east, perched on the slopes of the Higashiyama Hills, stood the Kiyomizu-dera, brightly lit by the lanterns of the people who had decorated the stage for the festival. She turned her gaze to the north and the middle of the city. There she saw her target. Despite not being brightly lit, the enormous silhouette of the Jurakudai was unmistakable. She took a breath and jumped into the labyrinth of the city that sprawled below. Long before Tokyo rose to prominence, the storied city of Kyoto was the cultural and political heart of Japan, and to this day remains the heart of Japan's historical soul. This video is sponsored by Ubisoft and its new game Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is now available. Set in the Sengoku era, it will feature Kyoto. This series is known for depicting iconic historical cities with recognizable landmarks, though many elements are adapted for the video game medium. Let's take a look at some of the key landmarks from that time. And who knows, you may even see some in the game. One of Kyoto's most famous landmarks is the Buddhist temple of Kinkaku-ji, also known as the world-renowned Golden Pavilion. Officially named Rokuon-ji, or the Deer Garden Temple, the site did not always house the Buddhist temple. In its early days, it served as the personal villa of the nobleman Saionji Kitsune, who lived during the late Heian and early Kamakura periods. The Kitayamadai, as it was known in Kitsune's time, would later be bought by Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third shogun of the Ashikaga clan and by far the wealthiest man in Japan during his time. Having gotten sick of his office job, like many of us do, Yoshimitsu decided to become a monk and converted his retirement villa into a temple complex. Of all the buildings in that temple complex, the one that stands out the most and by far is of course the Gold Pavilion itself. Extending over the Mirror Pond, the building consists of 3 floors, each constructed in accordance to a different architectural style, with the top 2 covered in leaves of pure gold. The first floor, called the Hosuin, or the Chamber of Dharma Waters, is constructed in the Shinden-zukuri style, which was used by the mid-Heian era nobility in their villas. It has verandas and large openings that let a big amount of light in, while also providing an excellent view of the gardens. The second floor, called Shōondo, or the Tower of Sound Waves, is made in the samurai style, known as the Bukkei-zukuri. It contains a Buddha hall and a shrine to Kannon, the goddess of mercy. Finally, the third floor is called the Kyokyo-cho, or the Cupola of the Ultimate. It is built in the classic Zen style, the Zenshu Butsuden-zukuri. Further up, on top of the pavilion's thatched roof, stands a bronze statuette of the mythical Chinese phoenix, the Fenghuang, also known as the Hu, a name which we are sure the Pokemon fans among our audience are very familiar with. Equally beautiful and impressive are the gardens that surround the pavilion. A prime example of the Muromachi period of garden design, they include of course the pond and its 10 small islands, as well as the plants, the bridges and the rock compositions that are carefully arranged in the Zen style. The aesthetic beauty of the estate attracted many high-profile visitors through the centuries, such as Emperor Gokomatsu, and became the center of the Kitayama culture, which incorporated many elements of the neighboring Ming Chinese culture into Japanese society. Alas, impermanence is the way of life, and the Golden Pavilion couldn't escape this fate either. Having already survived a fire during the Onin War, it wasn't as lucky when another fire broke out in the summer of 1950, caused by a novice monk. The original Golden Pavilion was burned to the ground, but in 1955 it was reconstructed, modelled as closely as possible to the original. While not as popular as the Golden Pavilion, another Kyoto landmark which must be covered is its little sibling, the Silver Pavilion. Officially named Jishoji, or Temple of the Shining Mercy, and more commonly known as the Ginkaku-ji, it was built by Yoshimitsu's grandson Ashikaga Yoshimasa during the second half of the 15th century. Yoshimasa sought to imitate his grandfather, and so in 1460 ordered the construction of a villa where he could escape from his daily administrative duties. Construction on the pavilion began in 1482, though unlike his grandfather's, Yoshimasa's pavilion spanned 2 floors in height and was constructed in 2 different architectural styles. Yoshimasa planned to cover them in silver, but the frivolous spending of the previous shoguns and the great expenses of the Onin War had almost emptied the Ashikaga coffers. Before long, construction slowed down, and Yoshimasa was not able to see the complex finished during his lifetime. Thereafter, the plans of covering the temple in silver leaves were abandoned. However, there is also an alternative explanation to the name, in that the reflected moonlight on the pond gave the lacquered walls of the pavilion a silvery appearance. Just like its older sister, the pavilion houses a statue of Kannon, but unlike Kinkaku-ji, the original Silver Pavilion has survived to this day, despite fires and earthquakes that have threatened it, albeit with some restoration works. It is in fact one of the two buildings in the complex that has survived to this day, the other being the Temple of Togudo, Yoshimasa's personal Buddha hall. Just as in the Golden Pavilion, the gardens of the Silver Pavilion are equally impressive. Two in particular stand out. One is the Ginshadan, meaning Sea of the Silver Sand, which is a sand and rock Zen garden that was constructed in the early 1600s. The other is the Kogetsu-dai, meaning moon viewing platform, which is a carefully crafted cone of white sand that evokes the image of the moon reflected on a lake or pond. Sadly, warfare was not kind to Ginkaku-ji. In 1550, a battle between the shogun Yoshikaga Yoshiteru and Miyoshi Choke broke out in the vicinity of the temple complex and caused a fire that burned all but two of its buildings, the Silver Pavilion and the Togudo. The Sengoku-ji-dai was unkind even to the stones of the gardens. A few years later, when Oda Nobunaga ordered the construction of Nijo Castle for Yoshiteru, he removed the Kuzen Hakaiseki stones and transferred them to the shogun's new residence. The Silver Pavilion gradually fell into disrepair until 1615, when a coordinated effort to restore it to its former glory was undertaken. Despite being constructed towards the twilight of the Ashikaga's rule, the Silver Pavilion, along with the more grandiose Golden Pavilion, became the center of the Higashiyama culture, as Zen monks who traveled between Ming China and Japan brought and incorporated into Japanese culture many of the neighboring countries' aesthetics. Not very far from Ginkaku-ji, in the Sekkyo ward, lies Nanzen-ji, one of the most important temples of Zen Buddhism. The headquarters of the Nanzen-ji branch of the Rinzai sect, Nanzen-ji is the highest-ranking Zen temple in all of Japan. The site where the temple would be built was originally part of Emperor Gosaka's detached palace, until Emperor Kamiyama converted the palace into a Buddhist temple 2 years after his abdication in 1291, and appointed Mukan Fuman as the chief priest. Construction was finished 8 years later. Throughout the centuries, the complex has been destroyed by fire on multiple occasions, most notably in 1393, 1447, and in 1467, as a result of a street fight during the first year of the Onin War. That last fire destroyed it completely, until the temple was restored in 1597, and then expanded during the Edo era under the patronage of the Tokugawa shogunate. Notable features of the Nanzen-ji include the temple's Sanmon Gate, which offers a scenic view of Kyoto, and even inspired a kabuki play, and the abbot's quarters, a gift by Emperor Go-Yosei, which are particularly famous for their rock gardens and the numerous pieces of art that decorate its rooms. When it comes to amazing scenic views of Kyoto, one cannot skip Kiyomizu-dera, a Buddhist temple located just south of Nanzen-ji in the foothills of Mount Ottawa. Established during the late Nara period in 775 by Enshin Shonin, the temple predates the establishment of Kyoto as the administrative capital of Japan. Its name, which means pure water, comes from the waterfall that exists within the complex. A legend about its foundation says that while traveling the country, Enshin came across an eremite, who in truth was an incarnation of Kannon. The divinity instructed him to build a temple there, and so Enshin did, dedicating it to the goddess of mercy. The temple quickly rose to prominence and became an important stop in the Kannon pilgrimage, as evidenced from its mentions in literature works such as the Genji Monogatari. However, just like the previous temples we have mentioned, it too wasn't able to escape destruction. In fact, according to records, the temple has burned at least 9 times. That might sound a bit too much, but unlike the previous temples we have mentioned, Kiyomizu-dera was part of the Nanto Rokushu, the 6 Buddhist sects that flourished in the old capital of Nara, and therefore was frequently embroiled in the armed conflicts between the temples, especially against the Enryaku-ji of Mount Hiei. The current hondo, or main hall, was built in 1633 as a donation by the then shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu, after the previous one had been burnt down 4 years earlier. It is constructed in the traditional kakezukuri style, which means that the entire stage that overlooks the cliff and provides a picturesque view of the city is supposedly built without the use of a single nail. let's take a closer look at Fushimi Castle, also known as Momoyama, Toyotomi Hideyoshi's luxurious retirement residence. Construction on the castle began in 1592 and was completed in 1594, so depending on the game's chronological range, it might not be included. 2 years following its completion, the castle was destroyed by an earthquake, though Hideyoshi had rebuilt it. Following the Taiko's death, Fushimi came into the possession of Tori Mototada, a loyal vassal of Tokugawa Ieyasu, who, in a famous siege in 1600, managed to defend the castle against the vastly superior forces of Ishida Mitsunari long enough for Ieyasu to gather his troops. In doing so, Mototada essentially won the campaign for his lord, who was set to become Japan's next shogun. In 1623, the castle was dismantled, and a replica that can be visited today was built in 1964. The modern reconstruction also includes a replica of Fushimi's most celebrated treasure during Hideyoshi's time, a gold-gilded tea room, in which Hideyoshi took great pride, and had even hosted a chanoyu for the emperor. The golden chasitsu was portable and travelled where Hideyoshi went, so it was also in the Taiko's former residence, the Jurakudai. Construction on Hideyoshi's palace began in 1586, when Hideyoshi still held the title of Kanpaku. It was located where the old Heian Imperial Palace once stood, and covered an almost equal area to that of the Imperial Palace. Like Fushimi, it was dismantled in 1595, with parts of it being used for construction at Momoyama, although some buildings of the complex survive. Moving further south from Fushimi and towards the outskirts of Kyoto, in Uji we find another of Japan's most famous Buddhist temples, Byodo-in. Originally built as the villa of the Minister of the Left, Minamoto no Toru, it was purchased in 998 by the regent Fujiwara no Michinaga, who passed it down to his son Yorimichi, who in turn converted it to a temple in 1052. During the later periods, and especially Kamakura, the Byodo-in temple complex expanded, with new buildings added and old being renovated, especially after a fire in 1336, caused by soldiers belonging to the Ashikaga clan, destroyed many of the original buildings, and another one badly ruined the exterior of the main hall in 1698. The main building, the Phoenix Hall, is the only original building remaining, and has received 3 renovations in modern times, in the Meiji era, the Showa, and the latest in recent years. Its name is derived from the statues of the hall on its roof. The main rectangular structure is flanked by twin L-shaped corridors and a tail corridor overlooking a pond. It houses an image of the Amida Buddha made of cypress and covered in gold leaf, the only extant and confirmed work of Jocho, who is regarded as the finest Buddhist sculptor of the Heian period. Chronologically speaking, the Byodo-in temple exists during the game's timeline. However, it is located at the edges of Kyoto, and its inclusion will largely depend on the map size. These were only a few of Kyoto's landmarks. The historical capital of Japan had been, and still is, the epicenter of culture. Various powerful and wealthy men have decorated it with numerous impressive and beautiful buildings and art. Kyoto is home to so many notable cultural landmarks that frankly it would have been impossible to cover it in a single video. So we picked a few that we considered to be the most famous and have chances to be included in Assassin's Creed Shadows. We hope you have enjoyed our tour of the city of Kyoto. More videos like this featuring history's most iconic cities are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.